Friends, thank you very much for joining us. Great to have you with us. James, good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Ian. Yeah.
What number video are we on today, James?
We're on 165.
And you teased me earlier and said that I would find this an interesting number. Is that really the case?
Yeah, well, it's not an interesting number sort of mathematically. Well, not very.
Oh,
but
okay.
here is the big bonus.
Go on.
It is the number of a fleet of suburban diesel hydraulic multiple units, or DMUs, as train spotters call them. And this is the fascinating fact I found out for you. Externally, the Class 165s of these can be distinguished from the Class 166 of these by the opening hoppers on every other window. So I just thought that's a fantastic niche piece of information.
It couldn't get more niche. And of course, there is a historic correlation between clergymen and train spotting.
There is, but I am not a train spotter. And I don't
I'm not. But the sad thing is, the moment you said DMU, I knew what that was.
That is very bad. And that is quite a major admission, Ian, I think, on one of these.
It is, but it's only because I used to go to school by train every day. And we used to see DMUs whiz past us in between the commuter trains.
Whereas I used to go on a Route Master double-decker bus. Yeah.
There you go. So yes, you did in South East. Well, we were both in South East London.
Yeah,
there we go. Good. Great. Well,
more importantly is where we are.
Well, folks, one of the things we love you to do is comment. So if you are a train spotter and you love DMUs and you know the number 6165, then do comment on that. But also sharing on your socials and liking and subscribing are other things that are really useful too. Yeah. So there we go. Good. Where are we in the lectionary?
So Trinity 17.
And 17 is a really important number biblically.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. We've talked about that several times.
We have.
And it's 2 Timothy chapter 2, and it's verses 8 to 15.
So we're sort of in this mini-series in 1 and 2 Timothy, but again, having started well in the last week on the beginning of chapter 1, we've kind of jumped and hopped and skipped, haven't we?
We have jumped and hopped and skipped and missed out a chunk, yeah.
Okay, so never mind. We'll live with that.
We'll live with that, yeah.
Good, okay. Is there anything to say, or should we just dive straight into the text?
I think we should probably just dive straight in. I mean, is it worth just sort of flagging up one of Paul's themes in 2 Timothy is exhorting Timothy to resist the false teachers, and that's a theme which recurs, and that's something that he's absolutely centrally addressing here in this particular passage, isn't it?
Yeah. Can I also notice that part of the bit we missed out? So just looking back at the beginning of chapter 2, you then, my child, he says, and we talked last week about the importance of spiritual parenthood and biological parenthood as the two ways in which we can be fruitful and multiply in the first creation biologically and in the new creation spiritually.
Yeah.
So again, that theme of that personal intimacy between Paul and Timothy is pretty strong here, isn't it?
It is.
Can I also notice that that previous text is just saturated with ideas of witness, and faithfulness, faithful men.
Yeah.
So pistos. Yeah. So again, these are themes that are going to recur in this reading. Notice also in that passage we're missing out the theme of suffering, verse 3. Yeah. The military ideas, no soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, and we noticed last week the number of military metaphors that we had, and also in 1 Timothy.
And the athletic metaphors, and I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of a summary of a lot of the sort of metaphorical language that Paul uses, all the spaces he goes to for his metaphors. I mean, he uses a lot of military, a lot of athletic metaphors.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So
lots of struggling, lots of hard working.
Yeah.
Also interesting, he talks in verse 6 about a hardworking farmer, and actually in Romans 16, when he mentions this whole list of people, he talks about so-and-so has been hardworking, and I think that hardworking is the noun and the verb actually for Paul signify evangelistic work. So the people who are hardworking with him are the ones who are fellow apostles, evangelists, preachers.
Right.
And of course, in Jesus' teaching, the hardworking farmer is the one who sows the word.
Yes. Yeah.
So another connection back with the teaching of Jesus. Yeah.
And of course, we'll see. There's another interesting connection with the teaching of Jesus in this passage.
Yeah. So we get into our passage, 2 Timothy 2, verse 8. Really interesting that the idea of memory, again, we noticed this last week, didn't we? The remembering is really important. Quite an unusual phrase, remember Jesus Christ. I mean, as if you forget.
As if you
We're not going to forget Jesus, are we? But it's just really interesting use of language, isn't it? Because remember here doesn't just mean, oh, there's someone you know, bring their name to mind. It means to ponder over, to chew over, to reflect on. And of course, in his characteristically in his letters to the churches, Paul is always saying, I make every remembrance of you in my prayers. So that shows the depth and meaning of the word.
It does. And of course, here he's particularly drawing Timothy's attention to these two ideas: raised from the dead, a descendant of David. And this, I mean, these are fascinating words, really. I mean, he's talking about the importance of the resurrection,
Yes.
Absolutely fundamental. But he's also talking about the importance of incarnation and the history. So it's taking back that remembering, and that picks up. I think that picks up a bit of a theme that Paul's already mentioned in 1:3, where he says, I think it's in 1:3. Yes, he says, I'm grateful to God whom I worship with a clear conscience as my ancestors did. So he's thinking back to that great sort of sweep of salvation history, or whatever you call it, that where God has been at work. And Jesus Christ is the faithful outworking of God's purposes in history.
Yeah.
So I think that's drawing our attention to that. So these are solid grounds for hope, is what he's.
Yeah, it is. Well, there's a couple of other interesting things about that. I mean, there are some minor textual variants. So some manuscripts switch the order because, of course, to us it seems quite odd that he says Jesus Christ raised from the dead, risen from the dead, and the offspring of David. We would think it the other way around naturally. Yeah. And I think this is the only place in Paul where he mentions those two things in this order.
Right. Yeah.
And there are some minor texts which switch that back, but of course the principle, when you see minor textual variants like that, the principle is what's called lectio difficilior, which is you go for the harder reading, because you can see why this slight awkwardness. Some manuscript writers would say, "Hang on, that's the wrong way around. I'll correct that." Whereas you can't think of a reason why you'd see it the right way around and correct it to be, as it were, the wrong way around.
Yeah.
So we can be pretty confident this is right. There are actually very few textual variants in this passage, interestingly.
Yes, and it's a point that Paul makes elsewhere. The idea that Jesus is descended from David. I mean, it's there in Romans chapter 1, isn't it?
Yes.
And where he says a descendant of David according to the flesh, is it?
Yes.
Declared Son of God in power by his resurrection, or by the power of resurrection. So God is at work. There's a plan. It's not just a moment of history in the resurrection, but it's throughout history. So, and when you think about that, it's really key, because he's going on to exhort Timothy to endure and to go on to the end. And so this idea that God is there throughout the whole of history, working his purposes out in Jesus, and therefore also in Paul and Timothy, really important.
And last week we also made that point, didn't we? We talked about the God's plan from I forgot what the phrase was in 2 Timothy 1, from the beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah.
From the beginning of the ages. So this is not an accident of history. I mean, it's quite hard for us to think into this context where, I mean, we're looking back from 2,000 years of Christian history where billions of people around the globe follow Jesus. Here, Paul is part of a tiny, tiny, tiny nascent movement here, very much a minority. Vulnerable both over against the Jewish population of the Roman Empire, but also against the pagan ones. So the idea that he makes these claims about God's plan and God's intention is quite striking.
It is, because he's holding on to a version of history that not many people hold on to in his day. And that's tough. Indeed. That's tough. Yeah. And he knows it to be true. He's had an encounter with the living Christ.
Yeah. Now, little warning here. We've talked in the past about the usefulness of ChatGPT, but you also found a problem here, didn't you?
Yes, I did. It's interesting. I asked ChatGPT to tell me something interesting about every verse of 2 Timothy chapter 2.
Yeah.
And it said, oh, this is the only place in Paul where he describes Jesus Christ as a descendant of David. And so I said to it, that's a lie. I was quite robust with it, and it said, "Oh, yes. Well, shall I rethink that?" And I thought it was really, really interesting. It said, "You're right. Thank you for catching that. I was mistaken to say it was the only time, only in italics. Paul does explicitly refer to Jesus." So it's really interesting that we found it a very useful tool, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
But as we said before, you've got to know your stuff.
You've got to be a domain expert.
You've got to remember. Yes, absolutely. You have.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Mm.
Now, the other interesting thing, so in English versions here, Paul's language is smoothed out and it's turned into a nice narrative. So I preached in my gospel. He's used that language elsewhere as well.
Yes. Now you found something interesting here, haven't you?
Well, for which I'm suffering, bound with chains as a criminal, but the word of God is not bound. So it looks like a nice narrative bit. Now, one of the things I'm trying to do, because I'm learning other languages and I've learned Italian for going on holiday, is I've actually happened to have my Italian version. That's the 2008 Italian translation. Ricordati di Gesù Cristo, risorto dai morti, discendente di Davide, and so on. It's actually laid this out in a poetic form.
Right.
And it's followed, I mean, I suppose it's because, derived from Latin and Italian, it follows the grammatical structure of what Paul says in Greek much more closely.
Yeah.
And it just actually does draw attention to the fact that this is very poetic. Actually, if you read, you commented, didn't you, when you actually read it out, it does have a kind of poetic feel to it, a structural feel to it.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think you just instinctively notice that. So I'm fascinated the Italian has done it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, fascinating that he mentions Jesus on the one hand, the incarnation, on the other hand, the resurrection. But from that, he goes straight into the fact that he is suffering for the gospel. Now, again, we've commented before. Paul says this all the time. He says, if you believe in Jesus, Acts 14:22, and Luke summarizes his preaching on his first missionary journey. Through many tribulations, we must enter the kingdom of God. And he never detaches that from the gospel. He always says, Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the way of life. God raised him from the dead and vindicated him. Repent and believe. And by the way, you're going to suffer.
Yeah, he does. He's absolutely. And what I think is really interesting, just to think about here, is that we get a little bit blasé about Paul mentioning his suffering and mentioning being in prison. But this was deeply shameful for him. He's chained. He mentions his chains. He's a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
And he's lying in a Roman jail in chains. This was basically this was not acceptable in the context. I mean, Roman citizenship granted you dignity in the ancient world, probably beyond all else. So that idea that he's languishing in prison for the gospel, and with the shame associated with it, I think he sees this as profoundly associated with the shame that Jesus, our shame that Jesus takes on himself at the cross. And so he sees himself as imitating the Saviour, and that's and he exhorts us and fully expects Timothy to have to do that as well, and us also. So we a problem with growing up in Western Christianity is that we don't understand this in anything like the way that our brothers and sisters in Christ across the world.
No, we don't. And it even goes back to the crucifixion. I mean, we often, Christian meditation has been on the suffering and the agonies, particularly in the Catholic tradition, on the physical pain of Jesus. In the Gospels and in cultural context, the crucifixion was the main point of it was it was a shameful way to die. The indignity of it, the humiliation of it.
Yes.
And Paul uses incredibly strong language here. So he's in chains as a kakurgos, someone who does evil things, evildoers. And in fact,
I think that really grates with him.
In Italian, it's a malfatore. It's a bad doer of bad things. So
you don't need to be able to speak Italian to know what that
means.
No,
exactly.
Yeah.
And he's in chains in Italian. It's le catene, because of course we get catena from Latin, meaning a chain, a succession of stuff.
Indeed.
So he's actually in chains.
But then what's wonderful here is that he uses this horrifically shameful idea of being in chains as a springboard metaphor.
Yeah.
To say, but the gospel's not chained.
No, it is.
The word of God is not chained.
Yeah.
And that's an extraordinary thing. It's unstoppable.
Yeah.
Therefore,
I endure everything. Now, again, what was slightly missed is that the word endure there is cognate with patient endurance.
Endurance, yeah.
I mean, actually in English it does, if we endure with him in verse 12.
Yes, and our patient endurance, of course, is a concept that we hear of quite a lot in another book of the Bible, isn't it?
We do, thank you.
That you quite enjoy.
I do. Revelation. Revelation 1 verse 9, I, John, am your brother and your fellow sufferer, your fellow experiencer, in tribulation, kingdom, and patient endurance. There are in Jesus.
Exactly.
And I think there is a kind of implicit eschatology here, isn't there, behind it? Because on the one hand, the contrast of the fact that Jesus has been raised from the dead and he is Lord on the one hand. On the other hand, in this age, Paul suffers and endures for the gospel. And actually, that's the lot of everybody. If we endure, we will also reign with him. Actually, there's a load more allusions to Revelation coming up in that little section.
Yeah, I thought I might have triggered something.
I shouldn't get ahead of myself.
We ought to have a trigger warning on the beginning of these videos, a Revelation trigger warning.
Yeah, yeah.
But endurance is an important theme in this passage, actually, because it comes up in the little creedal hymn in a minute as well, doesn't it? So it's a really important idea for Paul that, Timothy, and you kind of get this feeling that Timothy is personally really in need of Paul's exhortation to perseverance and endurance. He's obviously been having a really tough time in Ephesus with them. And so this is really important because it's the remembering and the enduring are the sort of twin themes, aren't they? That run through quite a lot of this correspondence.
Yeah. It's interesting that he says, for the sake of the elect, that they may also obtain the salvation that's in Jesus Christ. It is interesting that commentators say they may also obtain. There's one minor textual variant there, but it doesn't affect the meaning. But they may also obtain suggests, it's uncertain. But you see, that seems to me really important, because when Paul talks about the elect, he is not, as it were, a hardline Calvinist.
No.
And he isn't saying that, it's this lot of people who are definitely going to be saved regardless, and this lot of people who are not. It seems to me he always says that there's always an element of you need to receive, you need to respond. And so when he says they may also obtain, it has that hint of uncertainty. Not that God is uncertain, but he doesn't know how people are going to respond. He doesn't know who the elect are. And that seems really characteristic of all his writings, I think.
Yes, I think it is. Yeah, and of course, Paul is simply drawing on an Old Testament. He's a Torah observant Jew. He's drawing on that idea of election of Israel, isn't he? But transferring it into the new people of God in Jesus Christ. So it's just and
he says not all Israel are Israel. Not all
exactly. Yeah, that's such an important thought.
Yeah, it is. Now we come into this. The other thing, again, we've noticed salvation in Christ Jesus with eternal glory, and again, we've already noticed that Paul, facing his own death, just constantly has this focus on what is beyond. What transcends human life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Here we have our pistos hologos. We talked about this
another staying ashore. Yes, a characteristic of Paul. I think about 5 times in the pastorals he says this. It's quite common.
So just look back a couple of weeks, folks. You want to see? We had a little table showing them all there.
Yeah, it's his equivalent of Jesus' Amen, Amen in John's Gospel, isn't it? Or truly, truly, I say to you.
Yeah. And again, I think every version here, English, Italian, various other things, except King James doesn't, has this tabulated sort of in poetic, because it's got this very clear structure. If this, then that. If this, then that. If this.
Yeah.
A lot of just notice a lot of the language here has got the sort of sun prefix here. So if we died with him, and again, he has this, and I don't know if these are neologisms of Paul or not. Sunapethanomen. Sorry, I should have practiced that.
If we die with him,
If we've died with him, yes.
If we've died with him,
we will also live with him. Suzesomen.
It's very succept in Greek, isn't it? In English, it takes quite a few words to express this, but it's beautifully written in Greek, because you do get
because you get a if and a single verb, then and a single verb. And of course, if we've died with him, this is going back to his theology in Romans 6, isn't it? What happens in baptism? In baptism, we drown; our old lives die. So this is, again, very characteristically Pauline, the flesh has died and we live by the Spirit.
It is, but I think, and absolutely, I think it is completely about baptism, but it's also inevitable for Paul, lying in prison in chains, that he's thinking about real death, in a sense, the martyrdom that might be the end of the suffering that she's going through. So that's I think definitely there in the background, especially since he expects Timothy to suffer. And he doesn't know what that will look like, but so
interesting as well that the living is future here.
Yes,
so it's got a sigma in there, signifying the future. For those of you doing your Greek grammar, looking at the text, which is interesting again, because Paul often says we have been saved, we are being saved, we will be saved. And of course, in Galatians 5 and other places, we live now by the Spirit. 2 Corinthians 5:17, we are a new creation. So this is realized present, but of course now he's looking to the future, because our salvation although we've experienced the first fruits, it won't be fully realized until Jesus returns.
No, and the second half of each of these phrases is future. What's quite interesting, I think, is the first part, the if bits. He goes past, present, future, doesn't he, in the first three?
Yeah.
So, if we've died with him, if that's something that's happened,
Yes.
if we endure, that's present tense. If we deny him, it actually says if we will deny him, or if we.
It is. It's future in Greek, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So there's a interesting kind of structure which is lost in the English, I think. It
is.
Because,
yeah, and therefore it means that the fourth saying is actually an overall summary.
Exactly.
Of the other three.
Yeah. With that wonderful surprise in it, which if we are faithless, we're expecting him to say God will be faithless to us, but actually it's not what he says.
He's not faithful.
The complete opposite, which is just such a joy to read, isn't it?
Because he cannot deny himself. So actually, when we're incorporate into Christ, we are actually
in the very nature of God. Yes. It's into that. Yeah. That's a huge, huge idea, because fundamental to Paul's theology is that God can only be God if he's being God, if he's being true to himself.
Another little connection with Revelation, which is that right at the end of chapter 3 in the message to the church in Laodicea, the promise is to the one who conquers, they will be seated on the throne with me, just as I'm seated on the throne with my Father.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The other interesting thing here just to mention is that Paul is, as we often have to say, fully familiar with the teaching of Jesus. So there's really, if we deny him, he will deny us. Matthew 10:33. Basically, Jesus says exactly the same, doesn't he?
Yes, it's very close to Jesus' teaching there, isn't it?
Very close to Jesus' teaching. So he's drawing on that, as he so often is. He does it implicitly. He's so soaked in the Gospels, I think, Paul, that he doesn't need to quote explicitly, because it affects everything that he says.
I don't know if you can hear Barney barking in the background.
Yes, but he's obviously excited by 2 Timothy.
I think he is, and he's just wanted to join in the conversation. So that's a great model, isn't it? So
it is. He's quite a biblical dog, really, isn't he?
He's not very good at commenting on Facebook, on YouTube videos, so he's just joining in the conversation now.
Yeah. So
either that or somebody's at the door.
Well, no doubt he's got some canine theology in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here, and again, I don't know whether it's slightly lost in English translation, but once we get out of that hymnic bit, he goes on to the last bit of our reading, the last 2 verses.
Yeah.
Remind them of these things. Well, he's actually, the word there again is a cognate with remember. So it is fascinating that he says to Timothy, remember Jesus Christ and the gospel and all those kinds of things. And then he says, make others remember this as well. So as you remember it, so encourage them to remember. I guess in English, remind is it's not quite the same word as remember, is it? But
no, but it's very much in the same domain, isn't it? And yeah.
And the other word, charge, again, this is a cognate of martureo. So charging them is really saying strongly testify to and before them.
Yeah.
Before God. So again, you get the testimony, the remembering language. You get the testimony language as well.
Yeah. Warn them before the Lord. And this is a really interesting word here, isn't it? Where they're to avoid wrangling over words. Yeah. I don't know if that's a Pauline neologism, but
it only occurs here and in 1 Timothy. It's this word logomachane, logomacheo. And that's related to the word. Actually, it's logos, and it's related to the word for sword as well.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yes, makarios.
Don't use word swords.
No, don't use word swords. No. I mean, what an interesting thing to say to the church today, as well as in Paul's day.
Yes. It'll only ruin them, which is the Greek word catastrophe.
Yes, it is. Gosh, it is. Yeah.
It'll only be catastrophe to those who hear.
Yeah.
I mean, what is interesting about that for Paul is that on the one hand, he says, don't quarrel about words. On the other hand, he's very strong on encouraging Timothy to contend, to teach well, to correct error, and so on. Yes. So there's clearly a difference between here, what he's thinking about in terms of quarreling, using word swords, attacking people on the one hand, with actually engaging in robust debate on the other.
Yes, I think absolutely. And as a Pharisee, he would. Words were his stock in trade. He'd have known the Torah backwards and forwards, and upside down and inside out. So
and there's a very strong tradition of that kind of intra-Jewish debate in within Jewish tradition. I do remember when I was living in Israel, and I was walking down the street with a kibbutznik, and there was this people coming out of this room, and suddenly there was this all kinds of shouting and debate, and I thought there was going to be a massive punch-up or something. And I said to the person next to me, I said, "Well, what on earth's going on there?" He said, "Oh, they just come out of a political meeting. That's just how they discuss this stuff." There were people from the same political group.
Yeah,
they were having a debate. They were obviously something had stirred up, and they were debating that sort of animated debate, and then they just sort of go off and have a drink together. So
yeah. And if you like that novelist Chaim Potok, My Name is Asher Lev, those sorts of books, all chosen. I mean, that's the stock in trade of those stories about a Jewish rabbi and
the debates. And then we have this. This is kind of a memory verse, isn't it? Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. Now, just again, I just love the fact here that Paul is integrating what God has done. You don't need to be ashamed. No. This is language from the Psalms. It's all over the Psalms, isn't it? I am not ashamed. Do not let me be ashamed, because God vindicates the psalmist, and therefore he doesn't need to be ashamed for his enemy. On the one hand, so God has done that. On the other hand, there's something for Timothy to do. Do your best to present yourself. This is one of these. This is one of these sort of words of urgency of Paul, isn't it? Spoudason from spoudazo.
Yeah.
So there was work for him to do to receive and stand in the work that God has done for him.
Yes. And then we have this rightly explaining the word of truth. I always remember this from Barchester. Anybody fans of Trollope's Barchester, where Mr. Slope gives a sermon, and it's on this verse, which is interesting actually, because it shows that in Trollope's time people preached on the pastoral epistles regularly in ordinary churches.
Right too.
Yeah, absolutely, but kind of reassuring. But he's rightly dividing the word of truth, which is the King James version, I think.
Yeah.
And he makes much of this. But the word is interesting, isn't it, in Greek?
Orthotomeo. So you're a great fan of the word pogonotomy, aren't you? Which is about cutting your beard.
Cutting your beard. But this is cutting at right angles.
It is. Although we also have the English word dichotomy, so we've got the tome bit in there. Dichotomy is cutting something into two pieces.
Yes, yeah. But orthotomeo.
Okay, here's the debate: is this about cutting at right angles, or is this cutting in a straight lines? Because orthodoxy is about correct right, so it's about straight stuff.
Yes, I'm thinking of things that I'm thinking mathematically of things that are orthogonal, but of course that comes from something being straight. Against something else which is straight. So And interesting debate about exactly what this means. Now,
there is a bit of a resonance again with the Old Testament. So that classic verse in Proverbs 3:6, which is, I had it up before. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. And that's exactly in the Septuagint there, the Greek Old Testament. Orthotome, he will cut a straight path for you.
Straightforward.
But actually, some commentators think that that's being too literalistic, and there's just a much more general sense of the word.
Yes, they do. Yes, I mean, Fee I think thinks that, but it does. You have to think about the Old Testament allusion. For once again, Paul steeped in Old Testament, probably thinking that something along those lines. Yeah. I mean, he wants God's people to walk in orthodox ways.
And this matches his emphasis on sound teaching, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We ought to just sort of touch on what is the word of truth. Now, again, we would stand back and say, well, that's the scriptures. But of course, these writings become part of the scriptures, so Paul can't be referring to this. Is it about handling the scriptures? Is it about handling the word of Jesus, the gospel, the good news that he's passed on? He talks about my gospel earlier.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, it is the gospel tradition, isn't it? As Paul says in 1 Corinthians.
I probably just introduced a false dichotomy there.
Yes, you probably have. Yeah, and that's but there we are. Yeah, I mean, certainly Paul would have understood word of truth as in Torah and the Old Testament would have definitely been in there. But to that, he is also thinking of the outworking of that word in Jesus Christ and the tradition that has grown up passed on by faithful eyewitnesses. So it's going to encompass all of that. So essentially, what we now have as both the Old and New Testament
Scriptures,
scriptures. Yeah.
Lots of ideas there again, and interesting how Paul revisits things. So in the next verse, he goes back to avoiding irreverent babble. So he's really reiterating things here. What would you want to draw out in terms of preaching on this?
Yeah.
What are the hinge points, do you think, in Paul's argument?
I think the hinge points, I mean, two of them would be remembrance and endurance.
Yes.
But I think also I'd want to, it depends. I mean, obviously when you're preaching on a passage like this, you're mostly not preaching to people like Timothy, who've got a responsibility within a congregation for teaching. Yeah. So it's actually, there's something here about how we listen, I think, and how we are good listeners, and to take the word of the truth seriously and look for it and listen to it and be obedient to it. So I'd want to do something like that. The other reflection I have is that those verses 11 to 13, I mean, they are sort of poetic, but I don't know anybody who set them to music.
Oh, right. Okay.
So we could ask that. Somebody might comment on that, but it'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting how many hymns in the New Testament or poetry in the New Testament, I think it has been. Yeah. But I'm not sure I remember that. What about you, Ian? How would you take?
Well, I think the remembering, I think that the testifying thing, so that you turn what we remember into something that you articulate to others.
Yeah.
I think the thing I was struck by that central hymnic material is how we locate our present experience, both in the past of what God has done, but also in the future hope that we have.
Yeah.
And it seems to me Paul is always doing both.
Always, yeah.
Jesus suffered, therefore we suffer, but we have a hope that transcends that.
Yeah.
So every aspect of the Christian life, we root it in the past of what God has done, but we also set it in the sense of the future hope that we have. And that means that there is something for us to do always in response.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, James. Friends, thank you so much for joining us. Do those 4 things we love. Do comment. If there's any other observations you have or questions you have, do share on your socials. That's important, isn't it?
Yeah, very important. Yeah. Do click like on the videos.
Yeah, and do subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.